Well, hello and welcome to this episode of the Church Office podcast. My name is Anna Wood, and I have been let loose with the Church Office podcast this time by Gavin, who has made me guest host. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Becky Thomas, and I will introduce her and the topic a little bit more shortly. But just first of all, just to say a big thank you to our sponsors of the podcast, Church Suite. As ever, we are just going to re-emphasise what massive fans we are of Church Suite here at the Church Office. We love the project that they've created. We love the fact that they're constantly working to improve it and to bring new features to it, and all the functionality that it has that enables churches across the UK to do amazing work. So if you are listening to this podcast and your church is not using Church Suite at the moment, then we absolutely recommend you take a look and see what it could do for your church in your context. But that aside, Becky Thomas, thank you so much for coming on today and joining me.
Really glad to do so. Good to be here.
Would you start by just introducing yourself a little, but your context, what you do, who you are, anything else you want to share with us about yourself?
Yeah, so as Anna said, I'm Becky. I work for FIEC. My title is Director for Church Governance. That means I spend my days supporting churches in all kinds of practical, operational, administrative, policy, governance type stuff. So yeah, that's my day job. I've been doing this for a little while now, having done 15 years as an operations manager in a large church in Nottingham.
Amazing. So you've got loads of experience behind you leading into this role. Do you enjoy doing what you're doing? Is it something which has been an interesting change working for the FIC in the last few years?
Yeah, absolutely love it. I love the variety. I love the opportunity to talk to lots of different people, different churches, different contexts, different situations. Yeah, massive privilege, and I love it.
Amazing. And probably one of the worst questions I could ask you on the spot, but if you were to identify the thing that brings you most joy in your role, would you be mind sharing that with us? Anything that sort of really stands out for you as something that just is really great when you get the opportunity to do that or see what impact something you do has?
I think it's just being able to help churches see how good operational stuff, good governance really supports their gospel work.
Yeah,
It's not something that is just a nuisance or gets in the way, but that
absolutely.
can really help churches to spread the gospel.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I can relate to that. Just understanding that and help people to have that understanding that it's such an advantage to have those things in place and to have those things working well rather than being a hindrance. Yes,
Yeah.
let's fly the flag for all those things being done really well. Wonderful. Is there anything that you would say there's been a real challenge in your role so far? Anything that you find, or anything you find maybe is repeatedly coming up as a challenge for churches in the area in which you work?
Um, I mean, there are lots of challenges. I think probably the biggest one, the thing that's a repeated theme, is small faithful churches who are really struggling just with the volume of things that they need to get their heads round. A
Yeah,
lot is asked of them. And in many ways, the requirements on a small church are not that different to the requirements on a big church, but they've got less manpower, and it can be really challenging.
yeah.
Churches who want to do these things well, but are just really struggling with the volume.
Yes, that makes an awful lot of sense. And actually, that leads us quite well into what we're going to be focusing on today in this podcast, in the sense that one of the things which is landing on church governance tables is to consider the implementation of what's colloquially known as Martyn's Law, the Protection of Premises Bill from terrorism aspects. So, um, would you mind starting us off by just giving us a little bit of an overview of what that is? Because some people are probably very aware of it, but some people may not really have any particular understanding or knowledge of it. So, yeah, an overview of that from your perspective would be really helpful.
Yeah, so this is new legislation that's coming into force. It comes off the back of the terrible terrorist attack that took place in Manchester at the arena at the Ariana Grande concert. And it's really legislation that's looking to get public premises, so premises where the public gather, to think more carefully and practically about how they can put measures in place to protect people from potential terrorist action of various different sorts. The kind of landscape in terms of terrorism in the UK has changed significantly. I guess for those of us who grew up in the kind of 70s and 80s, it would have been IRA bombings with telephone calls, warnings that came. That's changed significantly over the last few decades. The kind of attacks we're seeing in public places and indeed in places of worship look quite different now. So it's encouraging premises to think about how they can be prepared for that.
Great. Okay. Yeah. As you say, I mean, it's horrific starting point in terms of where this legislation has come from. Um, but I think it's a really good example of actually how some positive outworking can come from such horrific things, in that I think anybody would find it difficult to argue that actually being prepared for terror attacks is a bad thing to do. However, for the smaller churches that you mentioned just before, um, perhaps it seems a little bit unlikely that that might come to their door. What do you think you would say if one of the smaller churches you're working with just felt that it was unnecessary? Is there anything from your perspective you think would be helpful to allow churches in a smaller context to see this as something which is a positive thing to do, even though it's going to involve more work?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things here. One, I think it is important, and we'll come in, I'm sure we'll come on to more detail as we go through. But quite a lot of the provisions of this Act only apply to premises where more than 200 people are gathering from time to time, is the wording that the legislation's using, so occasionally. So for smaller churches, most of the legislative requirements of the Act won't apply.
Okay.
However, I think it's good for all of us to be thinking about this. Acts of terrorism rarely follow expected patterns, and they do occur in unexpected places, in unexpected ways. Often they're perpetrated by people whose thought patterns and ways of operating are not what we might expect. They don't necessarily target the places or the groups or the people that we might anticipate. So I think it's good for all of us to give this some thought.
Thank you, Becky. That's really helpful. I think that's a really important point to remember actually when we're looking at things like this. It might not be something which is hugely likely, and actually the legislation might not affect your church context if it is on the smaller side. But thinking these things through can still be a really sensible thing to do. So yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. So from that sort of starting point, would you be able to share with us any key bits of information from the legislation that's coming up? Well, it's in force and due to be implemented in 2027 from what I've understood. So what key points do churches need to be thinking through? What is it that's going to affect from a legal perspective that we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, so this is legislation that was passed by Parliament in April last year, but there was a 2-year implementation period on that. And the government made a commitment when it passed onto the legislation books that at some point during the 2-year window, some statutory guidance would be published to help organisations as they prepare for implementation, which will be in April 2027. That statutory guidance was published just less than 2 weeks ago. So we do now have that. There've been lots of kind of speculation. There've been a fair amount of information out there about what was coming, but we've now got the statutory guidance that tells us exactly what we need to be doing.
Oh, amazing.
So that's relatively new. For reasons which aren't all that clear to me, they've not made a massive fanfare of the fact that the guidance has now been published. So it's entirely possible that lots of people will have missed that having been published. So that's the first thing. Be aware that that guidance is now available.
That's great. Thank you. What I will try and do on that note actually is put a link in the show notes to that statutory guidance so that we can find it more directly. Sorry, Becky, carry on.
Yeah, no, I think that would be really helpful for people. But the legislation sets out sort of different tiers at which this impacts, so different sizes of premises and events. So it comes in two parts. There are qualifying premises and there are qualifying events. We'll focus mainly on qualifying premises today, but if you are a church who organises large-scale events or involved in the organisation of large-scale events, it is worth looking at the guidance for qualifying events. So that's events of people over 800 people. So, you know, not your kind of typical church gatherings for most of us, I guess. But some churches will have kind of big-scale events.
Yeah.
But qualifying premises are public buildings, so places where the public gather, covers a massive range of things. So it covers things like shops, it covers cinemas, theatres, those sorts of things. But it also covers places of worship, so churches.
Yeah.
And the different sizes of churches are put into different tiers. So for those where you don't have 200 people gathering from time to time, and they're quite explicit what they mean by from time to time in the statutory guidance, that means occasionally. So it means that if you have 200 people turn up to your carol service in December, even if you don't regularly have 200 people turning up, you are covered by this legislation.
Okay, that's helpful.
So that's standard tier premises where 200 people gather from time to time. There is also a second tier, it's called the enhanced tier. Now, this is where more than 800 people gather. But there is an exception in the legislation that means that all churches, even if they're over 800 people, and we wouldn't have a huge number of those in the UK, I don't think.
No.
But even if you are a massive church with over 800 people gathering, you will still be under standard tier.
Great. So it's actually the same. Yeah.
Yeah. So churches are either too small to be qualifying premises, they're under 200, or they're in standard tier.
Great. Something straightforward. That's good to celebrate.
That's relatively straightforward and significantly more straightforward than some of the early drafts of this legislation.
Yeah.
So that's something to be very thankful for.
That's great.
And what is required within the standard tier is relatively straightforward. It is predominantly about preparedness. It's about having a plan. The more physical measures that might be required only apply to enhanced premises.
Okay.
So things like making physical changes to your building won't be required in the standard tier. Things like mandatory bag checks, for example, won't be required in the standard tier.
That's probably quite helpful to most church leaders who are envisioning trying to do bag checks as a welcome to our church service on a Sunday morning.
Yes,
yeah,
welcome
I'm glad
to
we
our
can
church
avoid
building.
that.
Please show us everything in your bag. Is perhaps not what we're going for.
No, not quite on the hospitality side.
No. So standard tier is really about thinking about what can we do to reduce the risks should a terrorist event happen.
Okay.
They particularly talk about 4 things that we should be thinking about. So evacuation, so getting people out of the building, evacuation, bringing people into the building to keep them safe, lockdown, and then communication.
Okay.
So those are the kind of big four things that we should be thinking about. How can we do those things, have a plan to do those things, much in the way that we have plans in the event of a fire, for example. We think about if there was a fire, what would we do to keep people safe? And it's a similar principle, really. What would we do with those four different things, if required, to keep people safe? And then the other thing that churches are going to have to do is appoint a responsible person. It's the legal use of the word person, so it doesn't necessarily have to be one individual. It could be your trustees, for example.
Okay.
And they will have to contact the regulator, the SIA, and say, we are the responsible person. So it is somebody who is responsible for the building. It really depends on your church context, whether it's most appropriate for that to be the trustees collectively as a whole, or perhaps for larger churches who might have somebody in, say, an operations manager type role. It may be more appropriate for an individual in that way. But they're the person who has control of the premises, is the phrase
Okay.
used.
So I guess if you appointed a single person to be that responsible person
Yeah.
in that context, we'd also need to think through having a deputy. If that person, say, was on holiday, I don't imagine
Yeah.
it would be ideal if that's the moment when something happened. And then, yeah, maybe we need to think through like backup plans, I guess, with that as well.
Yeah, and in a charity context, the trustees will always have the ultimate responsibility.
Yeah.
It's partly about who does the kind of day-to-day thinking through, putting
Yes.
policies into place, thinking about whether there needs to be any kind of training, for example. So unlike lots of businesses, churches operate slightly differently. So there won't always be the same people in the building.
Yeah.
For many churches, lots of our activities happen out of hours, whether it be a youth club of an evening or a breakfast on a Saturday morning, a breakfast Bible study. And there'll be different people who are responsible when those different activities are happening. So it
Yeah.
might be that there needs to be some training or some guidance, and the responsible person does the day-to-day work of making that happen.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think what you mentioned before when you were explaining about the four areas to really think through, that you mentioned the fact that it's in a similar manner to how we would think through fire planning, in terms of evacuation, emergency planning. In those contexts, we would need to make sure that different groups of people and different leaders of those groups of people using a building are aware of what to do in the event of a fire. So essentially, would you suggest it's a similar approach? It's making people aware of what to do in the event of a terror attack, in a similar manner to we would if it was a fire situation?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And different groups will have different setups, won't they?
Yeah.
So on a Sunday morning, our churches tend to be much more open door.
Yes.
Everybody is welcome. We're keen to welcome people in. And that clearly has some massive positives to it. But from a terrorism prevention point of view, potentially has some additional challenges. Whereas many of our midweek groups aren't quite closed door, but they'd have a different sort of a setup.
Yeah.
People would all arrive. We then might shut and lock the doors.
Yeah.
If we got something like a youth group, we wouldn't generally leave the doors open, for kind of safeguarding and protection reasons. So then the response to potential terrorist attacks is potentially slightly different. So it's a bit about thinking through the sort of different uses of our buildings, different contexts, different groups who are using the building. And for some of our churches, it's also thinking about if you hire out your premises, then what does this look like in that context too?
Yes, that's a very important point, actually, isn't it? Because building hires are fairly common amongst churches. So actually
Yeah.
making the hirers aware of what steps to take if something were to happen is really key. That's really helpful. Thank you, Becky. From those points of view that you shared then, if they're the sort of starting points of thinking through the four areas and planning for those, communicating on those, if somebody is starting at this point, would you have any suggestions as to what bit to start with? Where, if you were kind of helping a church start from scratch on this scenario, would you suggest a priority order as to what to look at first?
I mean, I think start with the statutory guidance,
Yeah,
always a good place to start.
definitely.
Then to think through, well, actually, what do we do in our building?
Yeah,
Who are the different groups? What are the different setups? Because you can probably break it down into groups who have a kind of very open door. If you have drop-ins, if you have, your services on a Sunday, you may well keep your doors open all the time, and they will need one kind of approach. Whereas children's groups, youth groups, perhaps, where people arrive, and then the doors are shut and the activities happen, operate slightly differently, and then probably some other activities that sit somewhere between. So to sort of categorize your activities, and then think separately about those different things, can be helpful.
yeah,
Think about the particular risks where you are. If you're in a rural setting, your situation will be very different to a church whose front door is on a high street in a major city.
yeah,
So thinking about the kind of particularly context dependent issues of your situation is important. And then starting to think through, well, what are the situations in which evacuating people would be the most appropriate response? What about evacuation? So perhaps just worth saying what we mean by evacuation. So that basically means if the threat is outside of the building, is there a way in which, or a manner in which it's appropriate to bring people who are perhaps just outside the building in to keep them safe? And then thinking about, well, what would lockdown look like? How can we get people to a place in our building? And not all churches will have this, where we can keep people safe inside and
yeah,
effectively barricade ourselves in. Um, and then thinking through, well, how would we communicate within the building that this is what's going on? How would we make contact with the emergency services who we
yeah.
need to assist us in responding to this kind of situation?
Yeah, that's really helpful as well. Thank you. Because one of the things which I've been doing in my context as I work with a few different churches here in Liverpool, and our buildings are all very different. The building I'm
Yeah,
in right now, until a few months ago, there was absolutely nowhere where you could go and close a door apart from the external doors. There's no internal doors which were even
yeah,
vaguely secure because we're having a lot of renovation work done. Whereas at some of our other buildings, that's very different. They would have completely separate places they can go, which could enable lockdown to be more effective. So yeah, the local context is really key. As you were talking, it just struck me that it sounds a little bit like it's almost like a two-prong approach in the sense that we're trying to assess the risk in our local context, in our local area, in our building makeup, in our group usage. And we're also then trying to emergency plan. Would that sound fair from your
yeah,
perspective?
yeah, I
Good.
think so.
That's helpful. So yeah, we're one of the things which we're hoping to put onto the Church Office website in the coming weeks is some sort of templated document which might help churches do some of that risk assessing and emergency
Yeah,
planning for Martyn's Law. So watch out on our website if you want to get something which might give you a bit of a starting point, even though it will definitely need amending and contextualizing to each individual church. But hopefully we'll be able to do that to be a little bit helpful. Um, Outside of all of this, because what you've shared is absolutely top-notch detail. Thank you, Becky. I'm very, very impressed at your ability to very eloquently and concisely communicate all these details. But if somebody listening wants to find out a little bit more beyond the statutory guidance, perhaps, or to be trained further, is there anything that you've come across that might be helpful for church leaders or people involved in helping churches to have a look at from a training perspective? Or is there anything anywhere else we can direct people to that you're aware of?
Yeah, so I mean, there has been some initial information out there. So probably the most helpful stuff that's been available is from Protect UK, which is a police and various other national security organisations' joint project. I think it's probably worth saying at this point, with the statutory guidance less than 2 weeks old, much of what's out there at the moment still reflects the kind of just pre the statutory guidance being published. I suspect that in the coming weeks, we'll see lots of organisations, including Protect UK, update their information and update their training now that we've got the certainty of the statutory guidance. But if you do go on Protect UK's website, I'm sure we could put the address for that in the show notes as
Absolutely.
well. They have some really helpful online sort of little training modules. Most of them sort of take 20-30 minutes to do, so they're not sort of big commitment, but they set out lots of the things that we've talked about in a little bit more detail, and help you think through how those things might apply and what you might need to put in place.
That's really helpful. Yeah, Protect UK I have come across, and that is definitely a good source of information. Something else which I did notice was mentioned on the Gov UK page about Martyn's Law was faith security training. So we can put a link in the show notes to that as well. It may well overlap with what Protect UK are doing, but it's something else that might just be helpful to seek out if we do suddenly find ourselves wanting to be trained some more in this particular area. One thing, another thing I've been thinking whilst we've been talking, Becky, is just with this coming in as a legislative, that's a hard word to say, legislative requirement. Would you suggest this as a good opportunity for churches, perhaps trustees or people who have been tasked with the health and safety aspects of running a church, a good opportunity for them to actually just review this in the wider risk assessment arena, the wider health and safety, security perhaps that we need to think about during our church usage? I just wonder whether that might be something worth encouraging our churches to do.
Yeah, I think so. I think all of us would recognise that keeping those who come to our buildings and to our activities safe is really important, and we do that in lots of different ways. Health and safety, our fire safety measures. This is another one of those, and I think thinking about all of those things together can be really helpful. We can often use some of the kind of same things really across those different pieces. And yeah, I think helping us think about how do we make sure that we put these things in place, not just because they're a tick box exercise, but actually we genuinely care about those we come into contact with. We want them to feel safe in our premises. We want them to be safe in our premises, and it's part of how it's part of our gospel witness in many ways, isn't it?
100%.
To love those who we come into contact with well.
Yes, and that's a really helpful point to kind of begin to wrap this up with, I think, is the fact that what we're doing isn't just a tick box. It is fundamentally about the gospel witness of our churches. We want to do these things well so that we can show people that we love and care for them in all different aspects that we have to consider. So yeah, thank you for that reminder, Becky. That's really helpful. One last thing I was going to ask was just about sort of moving forward from here. As you say, the statutory guidance has very recently been released. It's due to come into force as legislation next year. Do you have any suggestions as to how we, as churches and church leaders and governing bodies, trustees, can keep on top of perhaps any future updates? Is there anything you've come across which would be helpful, or any places you would suggest keeping an eye on every so often to check in for any further updates in case they do come through?
Yeah, so I mean, I think keeping an eye on Protect UK will be really important. I think they will develop their little training modules, but they also do a very good job of kind of tracking. It was through them that I picked up that the statutory guidance had been published. They tend to put that out on their website. You can sign up to their regular emails, so you don't have to kind of keep chasing after their website all the time. So I think that's probably well worth doing. You can also turn on notifications from the government website, but that's a bit more likely to result in quite a lot of emails. So it depends how much you love that.
Yeah, I think I might do the former rather than the latter, but both of those are really good suggestions. Thank you, Becky. That's great. Is there anything else from your perspective that you think it would be helpful for our listeners to be made aware of, to hear about in terms of Martyn's Law before we finish?
I think I'd just say don't be frightened by it.
Yeah.
I think it can feel quite big and overwhelming, particularly if you've tracked through the kind of discussions that were ongoing about what this might look like. Actually, I feel pretty comfortable that it's landed in a good and a reasonable place.
Yeah.
I think there are and there will be good resources out there. Don't feel like you're doing it on your own. Do make the most of the resources that are out there. Things like template documents that the Church Office will put out, and I'm sure many other organisations will put out too.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time today, for all of your experience and expertise and the research you've done. It's all incredibly valuable to me, and I'm therefore sure to our listeners as well. So thank you for your time, Becky. And for now, I will sign off. And Gavin, we'll see you next time on the Church Office podcast. Thank you so much for listening, everybody.